There are moments in life when the world feels strangely distant, as if your steps no longer match the rhythm of your own existence. You wake up carrying a quiet weight, not always visible, not always nameable, but present enough to dim the sense that your life is truly unfolding the way it was meant to. In these moments, the idea that the universe might be aligning on your behalf feels almost foreign, like a memory fading just before you manage to grasp it. Yet something within you insists that there must be a deeper order, a silent intelligence weaving meaning through every challenge, pause, and unexpected turn. This video begins exactly where many people find themselves today, feeling stuck between who they have been and who they sense they could become. The longing for abundance, clarity, purpose, and inner peace often emerges not from ambition, but from an aching desire to reconnect with the truth of who you are, beneath the distractions, disappointments, and emotional exhaustion accumulated along the way. Dr. Joe Dispenza often reminds us that we cannot create a new reality while emotionally living in the old one. The body cannot step into the future if it is still loyal to the chemistry of the past. That is the doorway through which this journey begins. Here you are invited to slow down, to breathe, and to understand that manifestation is not an escape from your present life. It is an intimate return to it. As you move through this message, you will learn to recognize the subtle signs of alignment, to understand the language through which the universe communicates, and to awaken the quiet intelligence already pulsing inside you. This is not a path of force but of remembrance, a re-encounter with a guidance that never left your side. Manifestation and the silent break in inner alignment. There is a particular kind of discomfort that grows quietly over the years, so subtly that most people never notice its true origin. It begins as a small hesitation, an internal resistance that appears whenever you dare to imagine a different life. At first, it feels like doubt, then it becomes hesitation. Later, it evolves into a belief that maybe abundance is meant for others, but not for you. This silent fracture between what you desire and what you believe you deserve becomes the invisible barrier that interrupts the natural flow of manifestation. And because this fracture is emotional, subconscious, and deeply rooted in lived experience, it cannot be resolved with willpower alone. It must be understood from within, from the quiet places where your body stores memories you no longer consciously remember. Every person who struggles to manifest abundance carries in some form a broken connection with their own internal rhythm. It is not a flaw, it is the result of emotional patterns learned in moments when the nervous system felt overwhelmed, unsupported, or forced to adapt quickly. These patterns create a kind of inner noise, a subtle interference that disrupts the coherence required for manifestation. When the mind holds one vision while the body holds a different emotional memory, the universe receives two conflicting frequencies. What appears externally as stagnation is often the result of this internal dissonance, where intention and emotion are traveling in opposite directions. This conflict becomes even more complex when you consider how many people live with quiet emotional fatigue. They are navigating responsibilities, expectations, losses, disappointments, and the pressure to survive in a world that moves faster than their own emotional capacity. When someone in this state tries to manifest abundance, it often feels like pushing against an invisible current. They visualize a new life, but their body is still wired to anticipate the patterns of old experiences. The subconscious mind responds not to the images held during meditation, but to the emotional history stored within the body, and so the person feels as if nothing changes, no matter how hard they try. What many do not realize is that this silent resistance is not self-sabotage in the traditional sense. It is the body trying to protect you, based on outdated emotional information. If the subconscious learned that safety came from predictability, it will resist anything that feels unfamiliar, even if the unfamiliar is better. This is why so many individuals feel drawn to transformation while simultaneously fearing it. The desire is real, but so is the emotional imprint that says change is dangerous. Understanding this inner conflict is the beginning of dissolving it. Dr. Joe Dispenza speaks about how the body can become addicted to the emotions of the past, repeating them almost automatically because they feel familiar. This means that manifestation requires more than envisioning a future. It requires releasing the emotional patterns that keep you loyal to your old identity. When the nervous system is conditioned by fear, scarcity, or chronic hypervigilance, the body cannot receive the signals of abundance. It continues to behave as though survival is the only priority. Manifestation becomes possible only when the emotional environment inside you becomes spacious enough for new experiences to enter. This chapter invites you to understand that your struggle with manifestation is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of emotional complexity. It is part of a human journey in which many people have been taught to silence their emotions, minimize their pain, and continue functioning even when disconnected from their own truth. When someone in this state tries to manifest abundance, they are not working with a clear internal canvas. They are working through layers of emotional residue, unresolved memories, and protective patterns that were never designed for prosperity. They were designed for survival. Recognizing this brings an important perspective. Manifestation is not only about intention, it is also about inner space. Abundance cannot enter a system still filled with remnants of emotional chaos. You cannot plant new seeds in soil that has not been softened. Before abundance can flow, the nervous system must trust that you are no longer living in the emotional weather of the past. You must create a sense of inner safety strong enough for your future to grow within it. It is in this recognition that a profound shift begins. You start to understand that manifestation is not a test of strength or discipline. It is a process of returning to emotional coherence. It is the art of creating harmony between what you desire and what you feel. You begin to notice the small ways in which your body contracts when you imagine prosperity. You notice the subtle memories that resurface when you try to believe in a new reality. You notice the hesitation in your voice when you speak your desires aloud. These are not obstacles, they are messages. They show you exactly where the inner fracture still exists. Once you understand that manifestation requires coherence, you can begin noticing the moments when your energy becomes fragmented. Perhaps your mind imagines a future of abundance, while your chest tightens with the fear of disappointment. Perhaps you envision prosperity but feel a heaviness in your stomach, recalling times when things did not work out. These physical sensations are the gateway to healing. They reveal where your emotional imprint is still anchored in scarcity. This chapter does not ask you to fix anything. It asks you to notice. Notice the emotional landscapes that appear when you think about abundance. Notice the parts of you that feel unready, unworthy, or uncertain. These sensations are not weaknesses, they are entry points. They show you where your attention is needed so that your body can finally align with the future you have been asking for. Manifestation becomes possible when you no longer fight against yourself, when your thoughts and emotions speak the same language, and when your inner world becomes quiet enough for the universe to respond. The subtle frequency of scarcity. Hidden beneath everyday life, there is a particular tension that settles in the body long before a person notices it in their thoughts. It builds slowly, shaped by years of unmet needs, emotional burdens, financial pressures, and the quiet fear that life may never expand the way one hoped. This tension becomes the emotional blueprint through which many people navigate their lives, and without realizing it, they begin to resonate with a frequency rooted not in abundance, but in scarcity. Scarcity is not always loud. Most of the time, it is quiet, disguised as caution, overthinking, or the instinct to always prepare for the worst. It becomes a lens through which the world is interpreted, even when the person consciously wants something greater. Scarcity is subtle because it does not always appear as fear. Sometimes it emerges as over-responsibility, as if the weight of the entire world rests on your shoulders. Sometimes it manifests as the habit of suppressing desires because dreaming feels unsafe. Other times it takes the form of emotional exhaustion, where simply maintaining life feels like an accomplishment. In all of these expressions, the body remains in a state of contraction, which affects the flow of manifestation. When a person attempts to hold a vision of abundance while emotionally anchored in contraction, the internal signal becomes fragmented. This is why many individuals feel that their efforts lead nowhere. They are broadcasting two different frequencies at once. The frequency of scarcity is shaped not only by current circumstances, but also by emotional memory. The body remembers moments of instability, moments when resources seemed uncertain, moments when trust was broken. Even after life improves, the nervous system may still behave as though it is bracing for a threat. This lingering tension influences choices, perception, and even the way opportunities are interpreted. Where one person sees potential, another sees risk. Where one person feels excitement, another feels apprehension. This is not a matter of personality, it is a matter of emotional imprint. What complicates this further is that many people have learned to normalize scarcity. It becomes woven into their identity in such a quiet way that abundance feels almost foreign. They may desire prosperity, but feel uncomfortable receiving it. They may hope for expansion, but instinctively prepare for disappointment. The nervous system, conditioned by past experiences, remains more familiar with constriction than openness. This internal familiarity affects manifestation profoundly because the universe responds not only to intention, but to the emotional foundation beneath it. When a person lives with an internalized sense of scarcity, they often misinterpret the signs that life presents. They may see delays as rejections rather than guidance. They may interpret stillness as emptiness rather than preparation. They may overlook opportunities because their attention is trained on what is missing rather than what is emerging. And so scarcity becomes not only an inner frequency, but also a perceptual filter, shaping the world so subtly that the person no longer questions it. What begins to shift this internal pattern is awareness, not force. The moment you recognize that scarcity is not a flaw, but a learned emotional state, something inside you loosens. The grip of old memories becomes less defining, and the body begins to understand that it no longer needs to repeat patterns created in moments of fear or lack. The nervous system slowly learns that openness is possible, that safety can exist without constant vigilance, and that receiving does not require a threat to be present. One of the deepest aspects of scarcity lies in the way it influences self-worth. When someone carries a long history of emotional survival, they often internalize the belief that they must earn abundance, prove their worth, or struggle for every inch of progress. This creates a cycle where manifestation feels like an uphill battle rather than a natural expression of aligned energy. The belief of unworthiness becomes woven into daily behavior, undercharging for work, minimizing desires, avoiding opportunities, or feeling guilty for wanting more. These behaviors are not chosen consciously, they arise from the emotional residue of scarcity. Dr. Joe Dispenza often describes how the brain and body repeat familiar emotional states because they feel known, even if painful. Scarcity becomes a kind of emotional habit. The body expects it, anticipates it, recreates it, and because the universe responds to the emotional vibration you carry, it continues to reflect the patterns that feel familiar, not necessarily the ones you consciously desire. This is why shifting your frequency is not about thinking differently, it is about feeling differently. Thought alone cannot override the emotional memories stored in the body. When someone begins to soften the emotional pattern of scarcity, they often experience an initial discomfort. This is natural because abundance requires openness, and openness requires vulnerability. To receive, one must relax the defenses that were built during times of emotional hardship. The nervous system must relearn safety. This is a gradual process, not a sudden transformation. It unfolds through small moments, choosing to trust when doubt arises, choosing to acknowledge desire without self-judgment, choosing to breathe slowly when the body braces for impact. These small moments accumulate, eventually shifting the internal frequency from contraction to expansion. One of the first signs that scarcity is dissolving is a change in perception. You begin noticing possibilities where previously only obstacles existed. Synchronicities appear more frequently, not because the universe suddenly started sending them, but because your inner world finally became quiet enough to perceive them. You begin listening to your intuition with more clarity. You become less reactive to external challenges. The emotional urgency that once dominated your decisions begins to soften. Space appears within you, space where abundance can finally take root. This chapter reveals that scarcity is not an enemy. It is an emotional echo from a time when you had to protect yourself. It was never meant to define your entire life. As you begin to release its hold, you move closer to emotional coherence, and coherence is the bridge through which manifestation becomes not only possible, but inevitable. The universe does not withhold abundance. It waits for the moment when your inner frequency can hold it without fear. Emotional coherence and the hidden conflict. Between intention and the body, there is a moment in every person's journey when the path toward abundance becomes tangled, not because the desire is unclear, but because the emotional body is still carrying the weight of past experiences. This tension is not loud. It is subtle, familiar, almost woven into the rhythm of everyday life. It appears not as resistance but as hesitation, a quiet tightening in the chest or a faint sense of unease when imagining a future that feels brighter than anything previously lived. This tension marks the space where intention and emotion part ways. The mind moves forward, but the body remains anchored in memories it has not yet released. Emotional coherence is the state in which thought and feeling finally agree, creating a unified signal that the universe can respond to. But for most people, coherence is disrupted long before they realize it. Childhood conditioning, unresolved grief, chronic disappointment, and habitual self-protection shape an emotional landscape that does not match the future they hope to create. The nervous system, shaped by repetition, clings to familiar emotions even when those emotions no longer serve. In this state, the body interprets unfamiliarity as danger, even when the unfamiliar is abundance. The difficulty arises because manifestation is often approached from the mind alone. People envision, repeat affirmations, construct goals, and imagine new timelines. But the emotional body remains unconvinced. It remembers the failures, the rejections, the betrayals, the seasons when survival overshadowed hope. When the mind says yes, but the body whispers no, the energetic signal becomes fragmented. The universe responds not to the loudest thought, but to the most consistent emotion. And the emotions held quietly within the body carry far more influence than the intentions spoken only with the mind. Dr. Joe Dispenza often describes how the body becomes conditioned to the chemical signatures of familiar emotions. Fear, disappointment, scarcity, and vigilance become internal reference points that feel safe only because they are predictable. Even when someone consciously desires growth, the body clings to old emotional states, as though releasing them would mean stepping into the unknown without protection. This is why many people experience inner conflict during manifestation. They are not battling laziness or lack of clarity. They are negotiating with a nervous system trained to equate discomfort with threat. This conflict surfaces in everyday moments. Someone imagines abundance but feels a subtle contraction around the heart. Another tries to embody confidence but feels a heaviness in the stomach. Someone repeats a future vision yet wakes with the same emotional residue as the day before. These sensations are not signs of failure. They are entry points into deeper emotional understanding. They reveal exactly where the inner world has not yet expanded enough to hold the future being sought. Healing emotional incoherence requires noticing, not forcing. When a person becomes aware of the emotional signals arising within the body, they begin the process of integration. The goal is not to override the emotion, but to understand why it exists. Often the emotional body is loyal to a version of you that needed protection long ago. It remembers when dreaming felt too risky. It remembers when trusting led to pain. It remembers when vulnerability brought loss rather than connection. When these emotional imprints are acknowledged with honesty and compassion, the inner conflict begins to soften. This softening is not dramatic. It does not occur in a single intense moment of awakening. It happens gradually, through consistent awareness, recognizing the tension that appears when visualizing prosperity, noticing the instinct to prepare for disappointment, observing the doubts that surface when considering expansion. Each moment of awareness weakens the grip of old emotional patterns. Slowly, the body becomes more willing to trust the visions the mind holds. One of the most profound shifts occurs when someone experiences a moment of emotional coherence for the first time. It may be brief, a sudden feeling of openness, a breath that sinks deeper into the body, a quiet sense that receiving no longer feels threatening. In that moment, thought and emotion align, sending a clear signal that the body recognizes as truth. When this happens, manifestation moves from struggle to flow. The universe responds not because the desire has changed, but because the internal frequency has finally become unified. Emotional coherence is not perfection, it is alignment. It is the state in which your future no longer feels distant or imaginary, but becomes something your body recognizes as possible. When this alignment occurs, the internal resistance dissolves, and the sense of separation between who you are and who you are becoming begins to fade. You no longer reach for abundance, you allow it. You no longer chase clarity, it arrives. You no longer fear expansion, you expand naturally. This chapter reveals a truth often overlooked. Manifestation is not an intellectual act. It is a full-body experience requiring the integration of thought, memory, emotion, and presence. When the body and mind finally speak the same language, the universe does not need convincing. It responds effortlessly because your energy no longer contradicts itself. The pathway to prosperity. Through inner receptivity and energetic openness, there is a turning point in every journey of transformation when the pursuit of prosperity stops being an external chase and becomes an internal awakening. It happens quietly, often after years of pushing, striving, or attempting to force results through sheer effort. Prosperity, in its deepest essence, is not something a person captures. It is something a person becomes able to receive. This shift marks the moment when the nervous system, the emotional body, and the subconscious finally begin to recognize abundance as familiar rather than foreign. In that recognition, prosperity stops being a distant dream and becomes a natural extension of one's internal state. Prosperity has less to do with what enters your life and far more to do with the space that exists within you. Many people live with a crowded inner world. Unresolved emotions, old disappointments, unspoken fears, memories that continue to echo long after the events themselves have ended. These emotional remnants occupy the very space where abundance is meant to flow. The universe does not withhold prosperity. It mirrors the internal capacity to hold it. A life filled with noise cannot perceive subtle guidance. A heart still bracing for loss cannot welcome expansion. A mind trained for survival cannot easily recognize opportunity. These inner conditions shape the relationship between a person and prosperity long before any material evidence appears. The difficulty arises because the human tendency is to approach prosperity as a checklist of external steps. People try to optimize routines, set goals, visualize outcomes, build structures, and repeat daily practices. These strategies have value, but they cannot override a body that still perceives abundance as unsafe. When the emotional imprint of scarcity remains active, the body prepares for loss even in moments of opportunity. It interprets expansion as risk rather than evolution. In this state, prosperity becomes something the person reaches for but cannot sustain because their internal environment has not yet learned to hold it without fear. True prosperity begins with inner receptivity. It emerges when the emotional body no longer associates receiving with danger. It appears when the nervous system is no longer conditioned to anticipate lack. It grows when desire is allowed to exist without guilt, self-judgment, or the belief that wanting more is an act of greed. Inner receptivity is the moment when the body exhales for the first time after years of contraction, allowing a softness to emerge that was previously inaccessible. In this softness, prosperity finds its entry point. What makes receptivity so powerful is that it changes the way a person moves through life. Decisions become clearer, not because external circumstances improve, but because the internal signal guiding those decisions becomes stable. When a person is receptive, they no longer act out of desperation or fear. They act from alignment. Their choices no longer stem from past wounds, but from present truth. Opportunities that once seemed invisible begin to stand out with clarity, not because they suddenly appeared, but because the internal fog preventing their recognition has dissolved. Prosperity also requires a shift in identity. The subconscious holds on to identities shaped by past experiences, the one who must struggle, the one who must endure, the one who must prove their worth, the one who is always on the brink of loss. These identities form a psychological boundary that prevents abundance from feeling natural. When a person begins to release these old identities, even gradually, prosperity no longer feels incompatible with who they are. It becomes an extension of their evolving self rather than a contradiction to their past. A powerful indicator of readiness for prosperity is the emergence of emotional neutrality. This neutrality is not indifference, it is stability. It is the moment when the presence or absence of abundance no longer dictates self-worth or emotional peace. In neutrality, prosperity flows more easily because it is no longer entangled with fear. The person no longer grasps at outcomes. They hold an inner steadiness that allows life to unfold without constant interference. This emotional neutrality becomes a magnet for prosperity because it signals to the universe that the person is no longer living in survival mode. The shift toward prosperity is also marked by a change in the relationship with time. When fear shapes the internal world, time feels scarce, rushed, or threatening. But as inner receptivity grows, time becomes expansive. There is no urgency to force manifestation. The person no longer collapses under the pressure of immediate results. They understand that prosperity is not a single event, but a state of being cultivated moment by moment. In this expanded relationship with time, outcomes arrive more fluidly, because the internal resistance that once blocked them has dissolved. One of the deepest truths about prosperity is that it cannot be accessed through striving. It emerges through alignment. It enters through emotional openness. It grows through inner spaciousness. It is sustained through coherence, and it expands through trust. When a person finally steps into this internal state, prosperity does not rush in all at once. It appears gradually, synchronizing with the internal expansion that is taking place. The more the person softens internally, the more life responds externally. This chapter reveals that prosperity is not earned, it is allowed. It is not a reward for effort. It is a reflection of inner readiness. It is not granted by the universe. It is matched by it. When your internal world becomes spacious enough to receive, the external world arranges itself to meet you. Prosperity does not begin with opportunity. It begins with openness. The quiet return to alignment. With a universe that never left you, there is a moment often unnoticed at first when the internal landscape begins to shift in a way that feels less like effort and more like remembrance. Throughout this journey, you may have discovered that the obstacles separating you from abundance were never signs of inadequacy, but reflections of emotional states formed long before you knew how deeply they shaped your life. The universe does not step toward or away from you. It mirrors the coherence within you. And coherence does not arise from perfection, confidence, or relentless positivity. It emerges from presence, from honesty, from the willingness to acknowledge what is happening inside you without judgment or resistance. As you walk through these chapters, you may have felt pieces of your own story echoing through the descriptions, moments of scarcity, tension, hesitation, or fragmentation between what you think and what you feel. These experiences do not diminish your worth. They illuminate the path back to your own inner intelligence. They reveal the spaces where expansion is waiting to unfold. Prosperity does not demand that you abandon your past. It asks that you stop living from within it. When the emotional body begins to loosen its grip on old memories, the future stops feeling theoretical and begins taking shape in ways that surprise even the most cautious parts of you. The universe responds not to declarations, but to alignment. When your inner world becomes quiet enough to recognize subtle guidance, life starts arranging itself with an almost impossible precision. You begin sensing synchronicities where you once saw coincidence. You notice opportunities where you once perceived risk. You recognize signs of support where before you felt alone. This is the essence of co-creation, a partnership in which your inner coherence becomes the frequency that the universe matches with unwavering clarity. Prosperity, abundance, clarity, purpose, they are not distant destinations. They arise the moment your inner space becomes capable of holding them without fear. As you continue to shift into this coherence, you may realize that the question is no longer whether the universe is conspiring in your favor, but whether you are ready to fully receive what has been calling to you for so long. The path forward is not about becoming someone new, but about remembering the version of yourself who was always capable of living in harmony with abundance. Before you leave this space, pause for a moment and ask yourself one honest question. Are you truly willing to receive the life that has been waiting for you, or have you been holding yourself at the doorway of your own becoming? The answer to this question determines far more about your future than any technique, ritual, or practice ever could. If this message resonated with you, allow this journey to continue. Subscribe to the channel so you do not lose the guidance, depth, and clarity that can support your transformation day after day. And as you move forward, let the next step unfold naturally. Continue watching the video on the final screen. Let it meet you exactly where you are and lead you one layer deeper into your own alignment. The universe is still speaking. Stay here long enough to hear the rest.